and for you to get to know me, get to know us as a team just a little bit better, so that we can continue to forge very strong relationships to helping all of our students succeed. A bit of background about me. I'm an immigrant to this great country of ours. 1987, June 20, 1:30 p.m. San Francisco. I still remember Pan Am 747 plane. I remember it landing and wondering, why on earth is it so hot? And yeah, that was a very memorable occasion. I was 16 years of age at the time, and my perceptions of America were formed based upon the TV shows that I used to watch at the time, including Starsky Hutch, Charlie's Angels, and of course, who can forget the Dukes of Hazzard. So that was the perception that I came in as a 16-year-old to the United States, and all of my formal education has been in the States. My childhood, I'm going to tell you, was a very interesting one, and I think it relates to the work that I do now. We grew up in a small area in the United Kingdom that was predominantly Pakistani and Indian, and it was challenging going to school. There were a couple of things. Number one, I had a horrible time learning. I had a horrible time reading. I couldn't understand. I couldn't follow directions. My attention span was very short, and I didn't know left from right. I stuttered. And the remediation at that time was to slap you really hard or send you out of the room to work with somebody. And that was the remediation, or that was the intervention. And that was my introduction to learning. And it didn't help, obviously, but that carried on until I went into high school. I've never been an A student. Learning was a struggle. It was a struggle even into my early 20s. Especially when it came to understanding and people getting really irritated at repeating directions. And I look at some of the students we serve, and I look at their experiences, and I relate to that experience, and especially what it does to your self-esteem and your self-confidence and how you see yourself. What really helped me and what really changed me was, I think, in 1980, when a teacher said to me, and this was the first educator who said this, he said, "I believe in you." That's the only time, that's the first time an educator actually said, "I believe in you." And I still remember him to this day. That had such an impact, because when you don't see yourself, when you don't believe in yourself, it's really hard to get anything done in school, in class, because of the self-confidence or the lack of self-confidence that you have. So the takeaway for me there was, if you want children to succeed, you have to expect them to succeed. You have to see them as successful. If you don't believe that, you can give them everything in the world and it's not going to help. So that was a pivotal moment for me. And it's important that I share that with you, because the struggles that our children are going through is something that can be helped. It's something that we can do something about. And it begins with how we see our children with disabilities. It begins with expectations. It begins with how we see them. When you don't have hope for yourself, relying upon the big people to give you the hope is what we should be doing to help them. But that said, that's founded my approach to education for the past 25 years. because I've seen some amazing things happen with children with disabilities. When you rise to the occasion, they too will rise to the occasion and match you in your expectation. And I've seen it time and time again. And for me, that's a lens that I wish to bring to Alameda. The other part to my experiences that I'm very sensitive to is when a system is designed to keep you where you're at. And that was my experience in the United Kingdom, where you're not expected to succeed. Therefore, we are going to keep you where you're at. Unfortunately, I was witness to race riots. I was witness to beatings. I too myself was a victim of beatings just because of the color of my skin. I look at all of that and I look at where I am in life now, and it goes back to how I see myself and how others around me saw me. And I can only see solutions to the challenges that we're facing as an organization. And I so much look forward to working with Alameda Mosaic in generating and implementing solutions that can really help all of our children. So that's just a quick bio of me, just the broad strokes. And I'd love to share further details in some other context. But Shamar, I think you're on stage.
Thank you, Randir. And again, thank you to Alameda Mosaic for inviting me and hosting this event, and also a good night and good evening, not quite a good night yet, but a good evening to everyone who is here participating. My name is Shamar Edwards, and I'm the Senior Director of Equity, African American and Multi-Ethnic Student Achievement is my official title. And so I also too would just like to start with a little bit about myself, where I come from, and my journey here to Alameda Unified School District. And so I'm originally from the Los Angeles area. If you're familiar with down there, I grew up in a city called Linwood, Long Beach, Compton. It's all in the same proximity. And so had an experience in an area where people nowadays would look at that community and potentially call it a hood, potentially call it low income, potentially call it an urban environment. But I will tell you, as a child, that was not my experience at all. And people's perceptions of what they would consider my community was not my real experience. And so I would describe my street, Linden Avenue, as a street of love. It was grandparents, it was kids my age, it was, it was families, it was a community. We knew each other's names, we looked out for each other, we rode our bikes around the neighborhood, and I loved that community. And then around the age of 12, I moved to Rancho Cucamonga. And at the time, Rancho Cucamonga was predominantly a white city, very, very little diversity. And I went through a culture shock. My dad was a truck driver for 7-Up. My mom was a customer service rep for the equivalent of PG&E down in Southern California. And they always preached to us the value of education. Neither one of my parents went to college. So my sister and I were considered first generation to college. And so we knew that we had love, and we knew we had high expectations from our parents. And they couldn't tell us, do this, do that. But they said, you better learn and you better go to college. And so that was the environment and the home that I grew up in. The other thing that's very unique to my upbringing is I grew up in church. And for me, it was go to school, go to church, go to school, and go to church. My dad eventually became a pastor when I was 12 years old, and so spent a lot of time in that setting. And what I've come to learn now as an educator, particularly as an administrator, how similar running a church is to running a school and being a part of a school district, because you are caring for people and you're trying to get people from A to B to C, and it requires a lot of love. It requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of sacrifice. It's a thankless job sometimes. And so there are a lot of parallels to that experience that I have. I have a really great relationship with both of my parents. I'm a daddy's girl. So I love my dad with all my heart, and we talk weekly, and he's my counselor at all times for everything. A little further along, as I graduated and learned how to navigate essentially a predominantly white environment, I always wanted to be a sports reporter, and so love sports to this day. Yes, I have on ESPN what's going on right now with the game, but I'm going to continue to stay focused and present. Tonight is a big night. But love sports, pursued it in college. I started out at Long Beach State. I transitioned from Long Beach State to USC and graduated from USC. I told you my parents pushed education. They didn't know that I was going to end up with 4 degrees. I have 4 degrees. I have a bachelor's. I have 3 masters, one in education, one in curriculum instruction. And then my 3rd master's is in negotiation, conflict resolution, and peace building, which is also near and dear to my heart. And I do some consulting on the side with other leaders to really build their capacity in that particular area. So got to the point where folks told me, I'm not coming to any more of your graduations. I'm sick of coming to your graduations. So I said, okay, hey, well, I'm gonna keep going. Y'all told me you valued education, so I'm gonna keep going. So I love to learn. I don't like homework, but I do love to learn, and have continued to value education. So transitioning, went from wanting to be a sports reporter to my senior year in college. Long story short, I interviewed a teacher, and it was something about her that was lit up. She was just light, and I could just see the joy in her eye, and it changed my heart and it changed my mind. And I decided to go into education and became a teacher, started in the Los Angeles area. First job, Inglewood High School. Second job, Oakland. I was in East Oakland with Oakland's finest. I credit that experience with my values, my philosophy, with everything that I've learned about education. I credit in East Oakland, East 14th and Hagenberger, right where that intersection is. And so I learned a lot. I started at an alternative setting. And so I have at heart, somebody asked the question, what is social justice for you? And social justice for me is about the marginalized. It's about those on the fringes. It's about those who are being oppressed, that this system has not been designed to reach out to and support. And so that's my heart for education. That's why I do this work, because I want to be a part of a child's journey so that they can break all of those boundaries and all of those stereotypes, no matter which hood you come from, that the sky is truly the limit. So came into education, teacher turned administrator. I was an assistant principal for 4 years. I was a principal for 11 years. And then, I'm sorry, principal for 13 years, take that back. 11 years as a high school principal, Cappuccino High School in San Bruno, and 2 years at Sunnyvale Middle School. And now I am with you here at Alameda Unified, here to serve, here to listen, here to learn. I want to contribute and bring, kind of organizational coherence. I think it's really important to tap into the expertise that's here, build the capacity and build the strength of the leaders that are here, because you'll probably hear me say at some point tonight, we really have to have strong schools. We need a strong district, but we need strong schools because they are the closest to your children. And so I see my role as supporting those efforts. So I will bring my comments to a close, but again, thank you for having me here this evening.
Okay, I'm next here. Good evening, everyone. I'm Vernon Walton, Secondary Director of Education here in Alameda. Happy to be here. And I want to just talk about a little bit about where I'm from and my career path getting here, because when I think about it, 30 years ago, I would have never imagined myself sitting here as a director of secondary education, or even in education. But that education came to find me in my passion. So I grew up in a small town in Sacramento County. And I've been in Oakland now for about 25 years through a variety of happenings in my life. When I graduated from college, I graduated from University of California, Davis. I didn't know really what I wanted to do. So I had a degree in life science and I went into lab work. So I became a lab assistant doing clinical microbiology. And I stayed there for a few years. And the thing was, something just didn't fit for me. And so I transitioned and went into after school programs. And I started working with youth in after school program in Upward Bound and some other San Francisco League of Urban Gardeners, WOW program, working with children, and something started to click for me and I wanted to go back and get my credential. And so I went and I earned a credential from Cal State Hayward at the time. And I got my multiple subject. Upon leaving there, I had a degree in science, so I got a job teaching science and found out that that is where my passion was. And I think the best lesson I ever got was when I took over the first time I took over the classroom. It was in the middle of the year, and I was taking over for a sub, and there's problems with classroom management as a new teacher. You know, I got in there and the kids were they're letting me have it. And so one day I just stopped. What is going on? Why you guys will you listen? And I remember Data and Deja turned to me and said, you got to get to know us, then we might let you teach. And that changed everything for me. At first I was mad. I was like, what? And then when I started to think about it, that was the key. And ever since then, that's been my mantra. Get to know them. Get to know them. When you get to know them, amazing things happen. When I meet new students, always I want to ask them first thing, who are you in 10 years? Who are you? A lot of them can't tell you, but the ones that can, that's where I envision. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a fireman, I'm a policeman, okay? That's what you are. And that's what my job is, to help you get there. So, you know, a little bit about me and growing up. In school, it really wasn't like that. I didn't have that. I had my father, he was a physician. My mother was a nurse, but I went to Elk Grove High. And that back at that time, I was one of the very few Black students there. And I remember, you know, my parents, they held very high expectations. There was no C's or below in our classes, nothing. And so I came home with a C in geometry. And my dad was like, you gotta go figure it out. You know, we'll help you, but you need to get down, get in those books, go talk to the teacher and figure it out. So I have a twin also who had a C, and we went to go see Mr. Jordan. And Mr. Jordan, I could still see him sitting on the chair in front of the room. And we walked in and said, hey, Mr. Jordan, we have to get a B in this class or we're on punishment. You know, it's not good at home. And he said something that I'll never forget. He just said, don't worry about it. Black people don't do math. And that was the tone at the time in Elk Grove. And so I got home, and of course, Dad was like, the expectations, you will succeed. You will make it happen. And I had that counter narrative at home, and I had that support to get to where I need to be. Long story short, I got out of University of California, Davis with a degree in life science and taking differential equations, all those things. My sister, she's now a teacher also. And so it was just, I really believe that having that counter narrative and those expectations placed on you on a regular basis, and the belief that you will and you can, is key, especially for our young Black men. And so that's why I'm do what I do. You know, long story short, you know, that's kind of how I'm sitting here right now. And to make sure that, you know, I can be that counter narrative, and I can be that one that holds some expectations for them. So a lot more about me, but, you know, just kind of talking off the cuff right now. So I'm going to turn it over to Yvonne.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to be able to share with you tonight. One thing that really rings true for me tonight, as I listen to my colleagues, is about the power of story. The power of story is just so strong. It brings community together, and it takes organizations like Mosaic to really make that happen. So just like my colleagues, my journey in education is one that is strengthened by family and community. Like Shamar, family was so important to me. I grew up in Sacramento, California. like Vernon in Sacramento, and actually we have something in common. He's a twin and I'm a twin. However, I'm an identical twin. There were three of us growing up, three sisters, and my family was very close-knit family. My mother was one of 7 children, and my father was one of 8. And they are a story that of families that you would not think of, traditional families where children would grow up and go to college. Both of my parents grew up families of sharecroppers. And you know what a sharecropper is. They were families that grew up on farms that farmed from someone else, very poor. Both of them grew up going to school in a one-room schoolhouse that was the church. So the same church was also served as their schoolhouse. One-room schoolhouse where the children shared from kindergarten through their high school. That was their beginnings, very humble beginnings. But the one thing that they grew up knowing was that education was important, and that they, when they had their children, that their children were going to grow up to be educated and that they were going to go to college. My grandmother was the one who instilled this belief in us as we were growing up. They moved from this rural town in Tennessee to California. My grandparents eventually moved out to California, and they taught each and every one of their grandchildren to read and write before going to school. So we were readers and writers before coming to school. The one thing that I knew before I even began going to school, that I was going to be a teacher. I used to round up the books and all the kids in the neighborhood, and I was going to teach them to read before going to school. So I didn't know that I was going to go become an educator. The one thing I also learned before graduating from high school was that I noticed inequities. And at the time that I grew up was on the heels of desegregation. I did notice that there were some kids who had opportunities and some kids who didn't. And by the time I got in my first year in college and I did a tutoring program in the elementary school, it became more clear and evident. And I think that was my beginnings of becoming an equity warrior. By the time I went to Howard University, HU, go Bisons, and I went to Howard University at the same time that Kamala Harris went to Howard University. It became a stronger priority for me to really be thinking about equitable education for students. And that has been really my journey, my whole career. And not just for equitable education in terms of race, but in terms of economic status, also special needs, but all those things that are cause disparities in education. That's what my journey has been in education, and it continues to be a journey. As long as we have an inequitable society where people get things because of, or think that things are disparate, we are going to continue to have this journey where we're trying to ensure that students get what they need in education. And that to me is what social justice is about in education. So for me, I think that my role as the director of elementary education is to ensure that all students get what they need, and that our community works to ensure that that happens as well. And that my support for parents is to teach and to help and enable them to get what they need for their students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yvonne.